So far, so good. And I know sometimes, he's here. Yay. Hi, Will. This is going to be funny because the last time I heard Will talking was in his werewolf movie. So this is going to be like a kick to see him all gray. And Megan Heil, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is launch into my very flowery intro where I'm going to make you guys blush about yourselves. And then we'll get going with questions. Welcome back to Talk Fiction, the podcast dedicated to entertainment media's most overlooked underdogs, fiction writers. I'm your host, Meg Olders, award-winning author and creator of the dynamic newsletter anthology, Beautiful, Daring, Stupid. With me today are horror aficionados Megan Heil and Will Dalton. Megan writes the Substack newsletter Fresh Meat, where she puts her best fiction on the chopping block for a round of unfiltered feedback from her peers. Her unique talents have garnered her multiple invitations to perform her short stories live at events hosted by author Chuck Palahniuk. When she isn't writing edgy, dark, and deranged fiction, Megan stays busy being a kick-ass working mom. Will is also a student of Palahniuk. His story Zombie Whorehouse was selected by Chuck to appear in Burnt Tongues Anthology, a collection published in 2020. Other stories by Will can be found in anthologies by Outcast Press and Crystal Lake Publishing. On top of all that, Will is super dad to 3 youngsters, yet still finds time to craft personal essays on fiction writing, parenting, travel, faith, failure, and living a worthwhile life on his Substack, Process by Will Dalton. I will provide links to everything these two are making and doing in the show notes, but without further ado, allow me to introduce my distinguished guests, Megan Heil and Will Dalton. Hey guys!
Hi. Thank you.
Is anyone blushing? I'm looking for blushing.
Yes.
You guys are great. I'm so excited that you're here. So we are talking about horror writing, which I am definitely a novice at. Horror, I feel like, is one of those, I don't want to say it's a divisive genre, but some people are definitely firmly, yes, I read or write that, or no, I absolutely do not read or write that, or I'm not a fan, so to speak. So I think it's actually more accessible than a lot of people realize. And I've sort of, the times that I've dabbled with it, I've always had so much fun. And I think learning from writers like you guys and just how ballsy you are about it has definitely helped with that. So hopefully anyone listening will get some fun ideas and inspiration from you as we chat. So the first thing I want to ask about is just your roots in the genre. So when did you first become fascinated by horror, and how did that fascination kind of manifest itself in your journey as a creative person and as a writer? And Megan, I'll hand this one to you first.
Okay. Well, I was a young horror lover. As a kid, my parents we kind of did the same thing every weekend. And that was, go to the bookstore, go to the mall. And we always got to pick out a book. And my mom let me pick anything that I wanted. So I was always going to R.L. Stein's Fear Street, which was like just a little bit older. Now the kids all read Goosebumps, and this Fear Street was like just geared a little bit for a more mature audience. So it had the horror and it had kissing. And so it was just perfect for me because I'm like, oh, yeah, I can read about kissing and vampires all in one. And so I was kind of obsessed. And my mom was like, okay, but she let me do it because she was encouraging reading. So, from a young age, I've been obsessed with R.L. Stein, Fear Street. And then from there, it just kind of, we liked to watch movies a lot. My family's in the movie business, and, they own a very small movie theater. It's like 3rd generation. So when I was a kid, they let me watch anything at all, like rated R, everything. The first movie I remember watching was Stand By Me, which is, Stephen King wrote The Body. And I must have watched that 100 times just because at the time we only had like a single screen. So I'd watch these movies over and over and over and over and over. So that kind of like being able to watch anything kind of helped. Yeah. So, and then it went on to like renting every single horror movie we could find one summer with my dad. And we just went through like the whole movie store and like found every single, B movies and just all of them, and close your eyes on the nude parts and whatnot. But
right.
like watching with your dad. Yeah. But so yeah, just, it really started with movies and Fear Street. for me.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely read R.L. Stine, but I don't think I graduated to the Fear Street ones. This was even before Goosebumps when he is R.L. Stine a man or a woman, first of all? Do we even know?
oh man, yes, he's a man. He lives in New York. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I was reading, and I feel like I was reading them because everyone was reading them, but they were just like the regular ones, like with just his name on them. Like they hadn't sort of created the series yet. So, yeah, but I did read some of those.
He might be more prolific than Stephen King.
Yeah. So I could get in on reading horror, but like that was the thing that was like an issue with me and my friend group was the fact that I could not watch horror movies. So that was kind of a bummer. And maybe that created a little bit of a wedge for me in terms of writing it myself as a young person. But thank you for sharing that. I love the like just picturing you in a movie theater as a kid because how awesome was it? Were you alone in the theater sometimes?
Oh yeah, a lot. Before my sister's 5 years younger than me, but before she was around, I would like pretend, I had like a friend next to me, and
Right.
although I did that like through high school and everything.
I remember like one time we went to see, I think it was the movie Big with my mom.
Yeah.
And it was just me, my mom, and my brother. And we were the only people in there. And my brother and I just ran up to the screen so we could like see Tom Hanks like really big, like because he was
Yes.
humongous. Yeah, it's super fun.
Ours had a stage in the front. So at the end, after everyone left, they'd like let me go up there, and it had like these velvet curtains, and they would actually like close them over the screen, and yeah, just let the credits run, and yeah, it was very fun.
Amazing. All right, Will, I'm handing it over to you. So where did your obsession slash love of horror come from?
I think I got it later in life when I was younger, and there was the scary movie section at the video store. I kind of was worried I would get nightmares, and whenever, like, I think I caught something on TV once or twice. Like, there was a Stephen King movie where there was like a body, and I would like see like the body, like when I'm like going into a room or like in my mind, I would imagine it. So I did not like horror, but I did Peace Corps. I was in Bulgaria, and my language teacher. I heard him talking to another friend. They kept talking about demoni, and I was like, "Demoni? Is that demons?" And then they were watching a show called Supernatural, and at the time, the first couple of seasons, it was like the Hardy Boys fight monsters, but they're American urban legends. And since I was not in the United States, I liked the show because each week it was like a different like US state. And I think they were all filmed in Canada, but like the show itself, like they were exploring different American legends. And so it was kind of like I was homesick. And then
Yeah.
I was watching it and I was like, wow, I'm not as scared as I thought I would be. I'm not as much of a wimp as I thought I would be. This is kind of fun. And as far as writing horror, that really also was kind of late in that over COVID, I had a musician buddy who was like, hey, you should create a bit. And I was like, yeah, I can create. And some author that I followed on Twitter, I think at the time, talked about a publishing house that was doing like a flash fiction contest once a month. And I was like, that's good inspiration because I tend to need the deadlines. And I figured having the prompt there would give me some boundaries in what I could write. And so I just went at it because of that. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more threads I could explore, perhaps in a future Substack post on writing, fatherhood, failure of faith, whatever I put on my Substack description that I forgot however many years ago.
I think
To
it
talk
still
more about
stands
how
though.
horror. Okay, well, to
Yeah.
talk about how how I fell into horror. Um, you mentioned both of us had like take the lessons of writing from Chuck Palahniuk, and his website also way back would recommend these other guys, Craig Clevenger and Stephen Graham Jones were a couple of them, and Stephen Graham Jones, very much horror author, super popular now, but back when I started reading him, was something that I only discovered because of people. They're like, if you like Chuck, you're gonna like this guy, and so his writing also really got me into horror. And so then I would buy anthologies to get one of his short stories. And then I had this book with like, 18 other horror stories. And so that also really got me into the genre of horror because of liking one particular author and their style.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. And I think, yeah, I think people don't pay enough attention to anthologies for that reason. I remember when I started writing YA romance, I read a book. It was called Meet Cute. It's like a bunch of short stories by all these different YA authors, and it kind of helped me choose my next, TBR in terms of novels because I was able to kind of like find whose style I liked. And I think it's a great way. And, Substack is another way to find people whose stuff you dig too. So, which is why we're all there. We want people to dig us. All right, very cool. So my next question is about how horror is often sort of spliced with other genres in a way that I think can make it more accessible for people who might hear the word horror and go, oh no, I don't like scary things, or I don't like gore, or I don't like violence. But I feel like a lot of times there's something else in it that I'll enjoy, whether it be like satire or like some weird sort of twisted romance or even science fiction. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about how the different genres feed each other to make something that's like maybe doubly entertaining or more accessible for people who like might otherwise be not into horror. So Will, what do you think about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the first like horror books that I read, bought on my own, outside of Stephen Graham Jones, there's that author called Grady Hendrix, who pretty famous also. You think he gets a horror book out once a year, but one of the first books he had was called Horror Store, and it was designed to look like an IKEA catalog. And it was a haunted house and an IKEA. And so just the concept, I was like, wow, this is different. And I had never read a haunted house book, but I assumed, having seen movies, that I knew what would happen. But a haunted like chain store, that seemed different enough. And the fact that the packaging was designed to look like a catalog, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So I think that's a good example of an author recognizing people may be reluctant. I was reluctant. And so they presented it in a way to kind of hook you, for someone who might not have wanted to read a horror story. I think Stephen King is famous for like writing characters that you care about before he unleashes the, monsters or demon cosmic forces, whatever it is. And so it's almost like a slice of life Americana until, the boogeyman comes out. And so from him, I think I learned patience, where I think with my own writing, I just want to get to the point. And that's probably like Chuck Palahniuk influence of like, just start in media res, don't skip backstory, skip flashback, just go for it. But I think Stephen King does a great job of making you care about the characters. And I think that's essential in horror, is that you need the stakes that like something bad could happen. And if you don't care about who you're reading about, then you're not going to care about the story. Or when the, werewolf does show up, it's going to be laughable. It's not going to be as frightening if you don't care about them.
Right. Excellent. Megan, to you.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, the first author that came to mind was Stephen King. And, there's a little bit of a difference in what you can do in a novel versus a short story. But, I just reread The Shining, and you really don't see any gore, if you will, until, like at 80% into the book. The rest of it is, just kind of the story that's just building. It's a drama, really. And, if you were to ask what is the scariest book I've read, I always say Pet Sematary, which is really a book about parenthood and, what a parent would do to, save their child. Again, that's, or even like Tommy Knockers, that's kind of like a sci-fi for a lot of it. So yeah, the length kind of has something to do with what you're able to do as far as character and setting. But yeah, even like, George Saunders, Will, what is the story? Sea Oak?
Sea Oak's amazing.
Is that horror? That's like, I don't know if that even counts as horror or not. Like, is there a decaying body, ghost woman in it? Yes. Was I scared? Not like jump scare, but that's just kind of it's very broad to me, like what horror can do. So yeah, I don't really think of horror like, bloody necessarily. I don't know. There's so many, it's just so open.
Absolutely.
Toni Morrison's Beloved, I hear, Grady Hendrix has talked about that as his favorite ghost story. Much would be literature, right? You wouldn't necessarily put that in the horror section.
Right. Megan, you just said something about how horror is really broad, and it's not just gore and violence or, jump scares. There's an element of unease that kind of can set in, and even that can be enough. And so for me, I think we always talk about tension in fiction writing and how it's essential to like keeping a story moving and keeping the reader engaged. But I think with horror, it gets cranked up a notch, and you have that escalation quest where it's not enough to just have there be like a tense moment. You have to keep kind of ratcheting the tension up a little bit. And so I think that's what makes like horror stories really effective. And actually, I wrote this, Megan. I did read that first chapter of your novella. And what it did for me was like, this is how I described it to myself, was like I felt trapped in the story. So it was kind of like I got pulled in, but then I couldn't leave even though I wanted to. It was like this really icky feeling, but in a good way. And I'm a person who like runs from scary things. So the fact that I was like, can I have chapter 2 now and read the rest? So I think that's what I'm getting at is you guys are both really good at that. And Will, one story that you didn't send to me, but I remember vividly was the one you wrote about the dog who kept digging up the bodies.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to find it and make sure I link it in there because that was another one where I just remember it starting out in this very sort of mundane way. And then the escalation of that piece in particular, I thought was just really impressive. So I'm curious if you guys have anything that you do in your writing practice or as you're writing a story that helps you like make sure those beats happen in that way that keeps the reader engaged, but also kind of gives them that, is this really going in this direction sort of feeling? I'm just curious about your process, I guess, when you're crafting a story like that, if there's anything you look at. And if you ever go back and say, you know, these beats need to be slower or faster, or like, yeah, just, I want to get into your heads about that a little bit. So I'm going to give this to Will first, since I just mentioned that upsetting dog story.
Yeah.
Which is still in my head years later. That's a good sign, Will.
No, that's great. That story was when I first started trying to write flash fiction, and I modeled it off of a George Saunders story, The School, where it just escalates like an object dying, and first it's houseplants, and then it's a dog, and then a kid gets hit by a car, and then like the kids are like, "Why is everyone dying?" And so the format inspired me, and it's not a homage to that story at all, but the idea of just how can you just keep escalating the dog's like unbearing, like bigger and bigger, like crazy stuff. So that was me like copying a format. I think when I'm writing now, how to keep the stakes. I think the challenge is a lot of times I might know the ending where I want to go to, but hiding that from the reader. I think sometimes what's also exciting is of not knowing the ending, then you find it, and then going back and putting in those clues or making sure it's not too obvious before you get there. And I think in the edits too, to leave echoes, I guess, before you get there,
Yeah.
so that when you get to something that's spooky, the reader may not recognize it, but it is a callback of some kind that on a subconscious level kind of clicks. And I think that I may not happen in the first draft, but something I try to do when I edit.
Awesome. I love callbacks. They're like my absolute favorite. And I use them like to an embarrassing degree, to the point where I think it might be like the one thing an AI would copy of mine when they're creating writing in my style. It's like, she always calls back to like first paragraph and the last paragraph. So let's do that. But anyway, it's fun for me because I like them. And sometimes readers, I get feedback that they didn't actually catch it in the beginning. And then when they hear the callback, that's when it kind of clicks. So sometimes I think it works. Okay, so Megan, on to you and escalation and how you strive to create that in your stories.
Well, I'm very happy, pleased to hear the effect that chapter 1 had on you.
Oh my God, it was horrifying.
Because I really struggle with that. And even as I'm going back through and editing, like my instinct is to cut like half of that. And then I'm going, no, like don't cut it. You need to like build that slow tension.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually my mistake is, getting to the point too quickly. And I think that takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And then also tying it back into the end. So this particular story went from the inside of this car, this girl trying to get out, to a canoe trip. And then I had to tie it back together, back to this car and the things that are inside of this car. Because if you can't do that, then, your story really isn't like a whole. But that's also, difficult to do. So, yeah. And while maintaining tension throughout. Yeah, I don't know. I think it just takes a lot of practice and rereading and having other people read. I send almost all of my work to Will to read, and he can point out like, oh, linger here, or, this is enough of this. But a lot of it, I'm really counting on other readers to to tell me, yeah, we had, you gave us enough, or no, try again.
Right. Which is super brave, by the way, and something that takes practice to learn how to get that kind of feedback too. But it's always helpful to have a reader's eyes on it because you're so entrenched in the feelings of it when you're writing it. And I'm the same way too. Like I feel like I always write probably a little bit more than I have to. And knowing where to cut is always tricky. All right, awesome, guys. So now I want to talk about twists because this is the other thing you kind of touched on when you started talking about Stephen King in particular and how he does an amazing job of sort of building a story before the story starts, the horror part of the story. And this is one of my favorite parts of reading horror is when, and Will, you touched on this, not giving away too much of what's going to happen in the beginning. So you kind of create this sense of security or familiarity for the reader where they're like, oh, I get this. I know these people. Like, I feel comfortable here. And then what happens is I feel like there's two kinds of twists, and there's probably more. And if you guys think of other ways that you work them in, please share. The first one is kind of like, I worded it as like an injection that kind of slowly creates this like, where you start to feel the creep. It's like, okay, something is off about this world or this person. And it just kind of like creeps up on you, literally, like hair on the back of your neck standing up. And then the other kind of twist, and Will, I'm not, this is not me picking on you. This is me adoring what you do when you come into my comments and you offer something like, oh, I thought this was going to happen. And it's like this demented twist on like my sweet YA love story where someone gets pushed off a bridge or something. And in my head, I'm like, I never would have thought of that. But if I had done that, it would have given people whiplash in a really kind of fun way. So what, in your opinions, makes a good twist? And as writers of this genre, do you ever try out more than one in a draft to see which one might be more effective? And who am I giving this to? Megan, you first.
Yes, the twist. Ugh, so hard. A good twist is sort of surprising. You're like, oh, yeah, I didn't see that coming. But also when you look back on it, you're like, oh, I totally should have seen that coming.
Right.
Everything should point to, hello, here's your twist. I think that's a great twist is when you're both surprised, you weren't expecting it, but you can look for it in previous chapters and say, oh yeah, it was right under my nose all along. And I think that is, I think a good twist is hard to make, one that's surprising or fresh, something that kind of isn't your, when you're writing, you've got like, here's the first thing that could happen. And then you kind of, you want to go with it because you're like, oh, I'm flowing. Let me go with this idea. But really, if you wait and try to brainstorm other ideas that might happen, you might find something more interesting further at the bottom of your list.
Well, and that reminds me of the piece that you shared with me, the car number 8, where you did like the choose your own adventure thing.
Yeah.
Because that was almost, no, I just have to ask you, and I'll share this one in the notes too, because this was such a fascinating way of writing a story. Did you actually wait every time for those polls to come in before you continued?
I did not. So I wrote the story and just kind of like guessed what readers would vote for. So
yeah, but it was very cool. Yeah, because that was an example of like kind of being part of the twist, or at least feeling like you were part of the twist, even if you didn't have any control over it in the end. I imagine as the writer, it's harder. Like Will said, you often know where you want the story to end. So putting the twists in almost feels kind of like a task more than like, you know what I mean? You're like, I know they have to be in these certain places. And so that's why I think when you add your beta readers into the mix, what comes as a surprise to them maybe wasn't a surprise to you because you're the one who created the ending that you knew it was like leading to. So I think it's fun sometimes to like hand those things off in those early stages so you can see what is surprising and what people go, oh, it was so obvious from the beginning that this, and then you go, okay, well, maybe I fed you too much in the beginning. So with this genre in particular, I think
I personally cannot know the ending. If I know the ending, I like can't write it.
So you're like a pantser 100% in that case.
So
yeah.
Well, no, not 100%. I have to know something. I can only know so on the novella, I could only know like 4 chapters ahead of where I'm going. And then I had to, like the very most I could know about a story would be halfway. And then at the halfway point, I look back at the previous what's written and work my way like backwards out of this puzzle. So for me, it feels good if like I've created some type of puzzle that I have to then solve using everything from the first half. But I cannot know what happens beyond halfway.
Yeah, that's fair. I like it. Okay, Will, so twists to you. What makes a good twist?
First, I just want to say I'm the opposite, where I won't sit down to write a story until I think I know what the ending is. And to me, that lets me know, like, oh, this story will be worth my time writing because I like this ending. However, I am open to the story changing as I write and not being like stuck on like it having to end a certain way. And so I don't want a situation like the How I Met Your Mother finale where the ending that didn't fit where the story had gone. So for making twists, I think you mentioned how like I'll make comments on your like romantic stories. And I think that in romance you got a lot of like will they or won't they? And there's a lot of tension that is inherent in the story. And I feel like that's making me expect something crazy is gonna happen. And as the tension builds, I'm guessing you're thinking, are they gonna kiss or not? And I'm thinking, is he gonna stab her or not? And I think either are valid, but I think romance authors could be amazing horror authors because that slow burn, or not slow burn, it's just having people together and the tension on like what's coming next. And I think for me, there's like certain rules, like you're gonna, dress nice, you're gonna, like put on your cologne, you're gonna like open the door, be kind. And there's these rules that if you follow, you would expect a certain outcome. But what if the other party is not open to that? So you can't completely control it, but you can try. And I think in horror, you also have somebody who's trying to live a good life, do the right thing. And what's scary is that you still may go home without a kiss. You still may have a werewolf jump out and rip your throat out, and you can't stop that. And that horrifying is that as much as you try to control the outcome, the twist is, haha, you're not in control. And I think what I like personally is stories where the character, as a reader, you're identifying with them thinking like, oh, they've got the situation under control, things are going great, like this is what is going to happen. And instead, something unexpected happens that they could not have prepared for. And that's horrifying because that's true to life. And I'm not talking like a Deus Ex Machina or something where like it doesn't make sense to the story. Something like that crazy happens in the like world of the story you've created. Personally, for me, it's terrifying that you are powerless to prevent tragedies. And so if you can allegorize that with vampires or zombies or whatever sea monster, I think it's a way to explore that sense of no matter how many rules that I try to put down, like there's still some like craziness out there I can't prevent.
That's perfect. And it's actually an excellent segue into my next question. So I think fiction generally, like a lot of genres, for those of us who write it, can kind of serve as a coping mechanism or a way to process either events that are challenging or fears that we have or just, bees that are in our bonnet for whatever reason, which kind of allows us to deliver a message about those things in a way that's separate from our personal selves because it's fictional. So I'm curious how, if at all, horror writing has served you in this capacity. Like, how does writing darker fiction allow you to process real life? And Will, you've kind of already touched on this, but if you have any more to say on that, like I feel like you've mentioned before the no one's coming to save you trope, or the you've written about this on your Substack, so I feel like it's okay for me to say it. Your fear of like not paying attention when something awful happens to your kids. You've mentioned like being in your phone when they walk off a bridge or something. So yeah, just if you have anything to add to that, how writing in this genre in particular kind of helps you process some of those things that you can't control, but you can't stop thinking about.
I mean, I think you kind of said it for me, Meg.
Okay.
As a parent,
I do that sometimes. I'm sorry. I often answer my own questions.
As a parent, I am terrified that something will happen to my kids when I'm not looking. And so then I'm gravitated to horror like that because I can, I guess, vicariously experience that and try to figure out how I would process it, something horrible like that happening. And then I also think it would serve as a warning. So like I will be less inclined to be on my phone when I am at a water park if I think that your kid could drown. And so I don't know that I've used it to process anything, but I feel like I've used it to maybe prepare myself or to like warn myself that I'm writing a message to myself saying, hey, be there for your family.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know but I think you said it better, perhaps.
Oh, okay. Well, and the other thing I was going to say is when I read Anatomy of a Killer, the one that you sent me,
Yeah,
I kind of got to the end of that and I felt like there was a message in it for everyone. And I feel like when you're writing a story that's a warning to yourself or a message to yourself, you're inevitably sending that message to other people too.
for sure.
Which is what I think is super cool about fiction. So I kind of wrote on my notes like horror as a cautionary tale, because I think a lot of times you're seeing something unfold that's horrible, but something happened to lead to that horror. And it's kind of almost giving you a like, well, it kind of makes me think of some of the B movies though, where like, it's always teenagers having like premarital sex that are getting like torn to shreds. It's like, what message are we sending? It's like, don't have sex unprotected in the woods if you're not married.
Right.
It's like, is that the lesson? I don't know. But that seems to be a pretty popular trope, particularly with, B movies from the 80s. With these ones that I just covered my eyes. I forgot this is just audio, but that's Megan in the movie theater, not being able to look at the boobs while her dad is there.
Exactly.
Yes. So you caught me. Anatomy of a Killer for sure was me processing the existence of serial killers in the world, because I think that I could imagine myself in many people's shoes, but that is a experience that I don't know. Like I can't put my head around that, which is good. Like I do not want to be able to like imagine what it would be like to want to go kill a bunch of people that I don't know.
Right.
And so that story was me, I guess, trying to grapple with like, here are people that are in the world, and why, how is that possible? It's nothing I could imagine myself ever doing, yet it's still what people are doing. And so
yeah,
I guess writing that story was a way with trying to grapple with something that I can't explain, can't understand.
Mm-hmm. Megan, do you have anything to add?
I have a hard time writing anything. Any horror I've written is something that I'm over, is not in current like coping. Very rarely am I able to write something to cope with something that's happening in the present. Usually I have to take something that I'm X number of years removed from. And then, I could like take a very small, like, grain of rice of that experience and then turn it into something fiction, but also that's something I'm learning because I don't necessarily feel scared by my stories. And, so it's kind of like, well, are my readers going to be scared if I'm not scared as I write this?
Yes.
So I'm still practicing. I love the horror genre. I do love the B movies. I love a slasher. But does that mean I'm like good at writing those? No. Um, so that's an aspiration. And yeah, coping, I don't know. I write lots of things and I don't necessarily set out to write, oh, I'm going to write this horror story. Sometimes a story just turns into horror or something that I don't know what it is, but happens to be disturbing,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Very cool. Okay. So here's one, because you guys are both spouses and parents and professionals outside of writing. Because horror writing can lean so dark and deranged, there can be challenges with feeling comfortable sharing your work with certain people. You both have young children, and so I don't know if they've read any of your stuff yet, or if there's like an age you've selected for when you're gonna let them, subscribe to your newsletters. Same thing with parents or people in your life who might read that stuff and go, oh my gosh, who am I working with? So what are your thoughts about, how your writing sort of coexists with the whole art versus the artist thing, I guess is what I'm asking about. And Megan, I'll hand that one off to you.
Well, that's probably my, biggest. I'm so self-conscious about anybody that I know reading my work. I would rather like not. I've gone back and forth on whether or not to write under a pen name, and ultimately I'm like, no, I want it to be my name. But I really struggle with that. My dad subscribes to my newsletter, and my aunt does, and every time I press submit, which is far and few in between now, I always feel like, oh no, that moment, like somebody I know is going to read it.
Yeah.
And my kids are little, they're 6 and 4, but they're into like spooky stories and they know like what I'm up to. And they know that I like spooky stories, but no, I won't let them read my stuff. And my husband, I always like it when he doesn't ask to read because I just feel very self-conscious about, anybody I know reading my work. So
yeah. What about you, Will?
So I am very good at getting stuff published that I don't want to tell my mom or anybody to read. And so you mentioned Zombie Whorehouse, which actually came out, the 2020 was the reissue. I think it originally was 2013.
Oh, that's the reissue. Can I just pause for 1 second? I have a funny story I have to share with you, Will, because I was telling my husband this morning, I've been having like super mundane dreams, and I dreamt that you got another story in another Chuck Palahniuk anthology. I even had like a cover page in my head and like a sort of title, to the point where I went searching for it. I think I dreamed it, but you did write about the reissue. Oh wait, yes, go Megan. Did you have something?
maybe it's the future one that he's about to submit
Yes.
to, the super top
Okay,
secret one.
if I win on
that his guidelines are yet to be
prognosticating
released.
this, because it's going to come out in the fall of 2026, Will. And the cover had like blue tones and like a kind of creepy guy with like a skeleton face.
Yeah, no. This happened for real. I put a note about it.
A
That's why you
note!
didn't find a
Damn
post.
it, I wish it was a dream and not a stupid note. But no, not if your note was stupid, but notes is kind of not my favorite. So go ahead.
And then I recently did mention it in my like a Substack post.
Okay.
But it is another story that my parents cannot read.
Okay.
And so I'm like super excited, where these are books that you'll find at Barnes and Noble and are in like big like Dill anthologies, yet I can't share them because there's either something very personal that I like repurposed for a story that I think would hurt people that like it's about, or they're just gross, which was the Zombie Whorehouse one.
Yeah.
And so I think what I discovered, at least with Zombie Whorehouse, is that people that I know don't care. And so, like, as much as you're afraid. Oh wait, we're back on. Let me start again. Let me answer the question.
Oh no, you are answering it. It's just about the challenges around sharing your work with people in your real life.
Well, but you said let's pause. I didn't know if you were gonna.
No.
Okay.
I just wanted to insert that very silly anecdote, which turns out I wasn't super cool in dreaming your future. You actually got the thing, and that's really amazing.
Okay, well, so then let me just say, having had something published that I was worried people would read, so much so that I used a pen name for it. Then when it was published and I wanted to share with people that I was working with, they didn't really care. And then I think I didn't let my parents read it, but I think they know that it's out there. But I don't know, like, I think people care less. The people that you care about care less about your writing than you think that they do. Or they will misunderstand it. Chuck Palahniuk has famously said that when he wrote Fight Club, his father thought that he was talking about his grandfather. He missed that it was talking about himself, that Chuck was writing about, if your father's abandoned you, what does that say about God? Like, his father was like, you nailed my relationship with my grandfather. And so I think people will like not necessarily know what you're saying about them when they read it. And then also, they're just not going to care the way that people that like books care about. And I think that's fine, and that's great, and gives me the freedom to go explore these like literary adventures in a way that I want it. My grandmother, on her it wasn't on her deathbed, but that's how I remember it, said like, hey, if you're going to write, be honest. Don't be like those writers that bullshit you and like make stuff up. Like, tell the truth. And I feel like that's horror, even though it has ridiculous fantasy creatures in it or situations that clearly are invented. I feel like it can tell the truth, and like an emotional truth that regular writing or more realistic writing may miss because it doesn't have the extreme in it.
Amazing. Great answers, guys. So that leads me to this next question. I cannot tell you how happy I am. You guys are just good at segueing naturally. This is great. This is making me want to do more podcasts with more than one guest too, because this has been really fun. I hope it's been fun for you too. I just have a couple more questions. So you basically, both of you have, said you're sort of, just by nature of what you're writing and your feelings about it, you're sort of cutting out the I'm going to call it a fan base, but it's really like fans of you base, your immediate family, your close friends, people that you're shy about sharing your work with. So you're really kind of like limiting yourself to strangers who might discover your work or, word of mouth through other writers and things. So I'm just curious, like, what your aspirations are with regard to being published. I know, Will, you're big on submitting to lit magazines and anthologies, and you've managed to land a couple of them, which is amazing. But your work, I would say, because obviously horror is one of like the big genres. When you think about like the big umbrella genres, horror is big, and there are commercial horror authors who are just churning out book after book of sort of formula driven horror. But you guys are writing something that I think is very different and authentic and harder to find an audience for potentially. So I'm curious, what is it you want for your writing in like the grand scheme of your writing life? Do you want a big 5 publishing deal? Would you love to get in with a small press for a novella or a novel? Are you happy to just get into these anthologies where someone like a reader like Will might pull you out and then go looking for more of what you're doing? Kind of like the cult following thing where you have a beautiful group of people who are just really into what you do, but it's not going to pay your bills at any point. So I'm just curious, and you can answer the here's my huge dream that I lie awake thinking about version, or the what would make me happy and content, given the state of things in publishing and the world in general. Like at this stage, what are you looking for your writing and yourself as a writer? That was a really wordy question. Sorry. Will, I'm going to give it to you first.
I mean, I think the dream is to, write a first novel like Chuck Palahniuk that gets made into a movie that then allows you to just write whatever you want after that.
Yeah.
I would be also happy with the route Stephen Graham Jones had with a bunch of like independently published books that, since went out of print, and then just word of mouth grows, and eventually he gets on like into like a big 5 publisher, and then smaller publishers find his out of print, books that you can't find anymore, and they start re-releasing them. And so he eventually grew big enough that like the earlier stuff is, being put back out there.
Yeah.
Either of those I would be happy with. I think as I am getting older and realizing that right now my priorities is probably to make sure that my kids are kind and nice. I've given up a bit on like literary dreams. I'm not giving up. It's just if all that ever happens is that I make some art and a handful of people read it and like it, but like I'm a good person in the rest of my life and I'm not absent trying to make that art. I don't know. It's a tricky balance, right? Because for sure, if I was ignoring my family more, I could write more. But I don't know that the opportunity cost is worth it for me. So if all that happens is what I have now, which is a few people who like tell me that they like my writing and they love my voice, I think at the moment I'm content. But I would also say that's what you say when you don't have a big contract.
Yeah.
And so
until you do, and then you can say the other thing.
Lying a bit to myself and lying to you and saying like, if this is it, I'm good with that. Where I think deep down, I already told you, like, I would love to, get that Netflix the story made into some show that like gives me the money to then just focus on writing full time. That would be amazing.
Yes.
And I would not, I would not poo-poo that happening at all.
Absolutely. Okay, Megan.
Yeah, I like to keep big dreams present. I do really funny, strange things. Like when I get those junk mail checks, paid to the order of Megan, like, here, take out this loan. I keep them and I write in it like, advance for first novella in the memo and like save them and collect them with the hopes that, maybe someday I'll have something traditionally published, that it's my goal. I do like big 5. That's attractive, but also something like, what Stephen Graham Jones, like Will mentioned, that's also appealing. So I'd like to be anything but self-published, which is really all I am right now. I'm still sending out short stories to magazines and working on longer pieces. And, the older my kids get, the easier it is to find some time to write although I also have like a business to balance and other things. So sometimes I, feel like guilty when I'm spending time writing when I should be spending time, helping my business. But, I do what I can, and I won't let go of those dreams. I just kind of visualize them until they happen.
Yes.
Or I die, whichever comes first.
Fantastic. I love it. Okay. I'm just going to ask one more, just quickie, and then we can close out because I think we're around the hour mark. And this has been so awesome to talk to you guys about this. For anyone who's listening who has never tried to write horror or maybe hasn't even explored reading it, which I hope they will now that they've met you, and I'm going to share some of your work in the show post. But just advice for any writer who's hesitant to kind of tiptoe into it. And Megan, I'll start with you.
Oh, just do it. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
What do you have to be hesitant about? I mean, just go with it. And what's the worst that can happen? Someone's like, this is not for me. Well, and
this is the time of year to do it too. I feel like this is going to come out like a week before Halloween is my plan.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's the time when people do start experimenting a little bit. They're like, maybe I can write a scary story. And
yeah. The appeal to me is like, it's supposed to be fun. And I mean, it can get very like gloomy and sad, but a lot of it is just fun and take advantage of just like messing around. Like just write something and be like, oh, this is for nothing. And, be playing around and see where it can go. And sometimes you'll surprise yourself. Yeah. Just do it.
Well, I think that's how you discover that you might be interested in writing something in a different genre than you ever have before, because until you try it, you don't really know. Like I never used to write sci-fi either. And I have a couple of like science fiction or speculative pieces that I'm really proud of that I've written. And so if not for Substack and the sort of, I feel like old school Substack, I mentioned that has kind of like drifted a little bit, but in the beginning it was very much just try things out and there'll be like warm, happy people around to tell you that you should keep trying.
Yeah.
And I do think that's still there, but it's been kind of muddled by some of the louder stuff. But okay, Will, on to you. Advice for our horror virgins.
I think if you've listened to this podcast, you'll see that there's not that big of a leap between like romance and horror, or definitely crime and horror, or like cousins on the same shelf almost. And just go for it. Yeah. Think of like what would scare you. I think is I mentioned that about like what terrifies me as a parent. The stuff that I'm attracted to now in horror, like I totally love horror that is about like some parents, right? Parent horror. I would not have cared about that before I had kids.
Right.
I also love Airbnb horror because when we travel, we got like 3 kids, so like we have to get an extra hotel room or stay in an Airbnb.
Yeah.
So horror that like is set in like a house or room that you're renting, I love that kind of stuff. So because that's what we do. So think about what in your life terrifies you and just go for it.
Yes, I love that. For me, I think what would interest me to write about, which I haven't yet really, is like either pharmaceutical horror or something to do with like the beauty industry. I didn't see The Substance because I've heard it was like really, really upsetting, but that kind of thing with all the stuff people are doing to themselves now, like just writing something about that going horribly wrong, which it already does, unfortunately, sometimes for some people. But that would kind of be my niche interest area if I was going to dabble some more.
Twilight Zone with the pig nose.
Yes, the Twilight Zone. So good. That was the perfect one. Thank you guys so much. This was really excellent. I'm super excited to get this edited and out in the world, and I hope you'll both share it with your newsletter audience and your friends and family, since we didn't say too many bad words or show any nudity or it's going to be audio anyway. It's not going to be video, but yeah, great. So I'm going to sign off here with you guys, and I look forward to chatting with you in our various comment sections, and good luck with everything you're working on.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hey there. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, you can let me know by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, rating, or review, depending on where you're listening, or by sharing this podcast with your favorite people. Talk Fiction is part of a dynamic anthology of short fiction, essays, poetry, humor, and multimedia experiments written and produced by me, Meg Olders. If you're into the stuff I'm making, or you're just into supporting the dynamic individual who makes it, I hope you'll consider becoming a free or paid subscriber at megolders.substack.com. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.